A new political year has brought yet another dual citizenship crisis, this time with Labor MP David Feeney. The Victorian MP admitted that he was unable to locate paperwork proving that he had renounced his British citizenship prior to his election to Parliament.
Well, earlier in the week he resigned from federal politics, triggering a by-election in the seat of Batman. To discuss this and other political issues of the week, we're joined by Shadow Minister for Employment Services and Workplace Participation, Ed Husic. Welcome.
Good morning to you both.
First, though, I wanted to start with an announcement that Labor has made as far as health premiums are concerned. Your plan is to cap increases in health premiums for 2 years. How are you going to do that?
So we're doing a number of things. I mean, this is a big announcement in terms of cost of living, and for families that have been wondering, we seem to be paying more for private health insurance. We seem to get less coverage for what we're paying for, and our wages aren't increasing, so something's got to add up, and it isn't at the moment. So Labor has said that if we win government, for the first 2 years of a Labor government, we would freeze the increases, cap them at 2%, and then we would get the Productivity Commission to go in and see what can be done to make private healthcare more affordable, what are the cost drivers that are forcing insurers to increase premiums in the way that they are, and to look at what the carrot and sticks can be to improve the way that the system works. And we think this is an important way of, as I said, dealing with the cost of living pressures that are being brought by increases, premium increases over the last 10 years, 5.5% on average, going up. The exclusions, roughly 10 years ago, about 9% of policies had exclusions in them, 40% now. And it's making people question the value of private health insurance.
But are you saying that essentially these health funds are gouging consumers in the way they operate? Because at the moment their argument is it's simply unsustainable if they don't have those price increases, given Australia's population is both growing and also ageing.
I'm not saying it, residents are saying it, average Australians are saying it to me. They feel like they are not getting value for money with private health insurance because they come to me and say, like they do whenever the premium increases hit, and bear in mind, families are paying $1,000 more in private health insurance since the coalition came in. They come to me, average residents, and say, average Australians, and say, this doesn't make sense. I'm paying way more for private health insurance, an increase that's higher than inflation. Why are we being forced to pay this? I think those type of Australians are going to welcome what we're announcing, because it's trying to make sure that longer term there is support and value seen in private health insurance that does have a role to play in the healthcare sector in Australia.
We heard from both leaders this week, essentially drawing the battle lines for the year ahead, both Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten. Health was part of Bill Shorten's pitch, but there was a lot about economics, particularly restoring penalty rates, increasing the minimum wage, targeting big business. Are those sorts of, in a sense, business unfriendly policies good economics? Is that a risky approach to take?
I think what we are trying to do is get balance. We think that at the moment, when you look at it, average Australians aren't seeing their pay packets increase at a rate that they're comfortable with, that will cover the costs of living. Cost of living will be the big political issue, I reckon, of this year, where people want to see some movement in their wages. They want to be able to see a better deal there. They want to see us tackle, like, for example, what we've announced today in terms of private health insurance premiums and bringing some common sense into the way that that's happening. What you're seeing is Bill Shorten standing up for average Australians and Malcolm Turnbull sticking up for millionaires and multinationals.
Although businesses would set the wages, are you taking the power away from business to rise the wages of workers?
Okay, so let's take this into account, Joe. Wage increases are basically flatlining, right? Company profits increasing strongly. Investors are doing well. When you look at dividend growth over the course of the last few years, up by billions. I mean, roughly 30 billion. So investors are doing well, companies are doing well, average workers are not. And the reason for that is that you see businesses putting a clamp on wage increases, and people are worried about what that's doing. The average Australian is worried about, well, how am I supposed to make ends meet in that type of environment? You've got to have balance. We recognise the role and the value of strong businesses in the economy, but everyone's got to be able to share in that, as opposed to one part of the table doing well and the rest not.
Is there also a risk, though, if you were to lift the minimum wage, for instance, you could also perhaps increase unemployment, as some businesses, particularly small business, find it more difficult to employ those people?
Well, you'll see some businesses and some business representatives trying to rattle those bones and spook people into that. How they can argue that in a climate where, as I said, profitability is very strong and
That may be
investors
for
are
the
doing
large
very
corporations.
well.
What about for those very small businesses?
Well, we've been arguing that for a lot of those small businesses that want to see traffic come through the front door, they know that their customers who are worried about whether or not they're able to afford or have they got the discretionary spend that they would like, this is a big issue. I mean, this is why retail, in terms of retail spending, you see retail spending not doing as well as it should, and I think it reflects largely a concern that average Australians have about the fact that their wages aren't moving and it's not giving them that wiggle room or that extra room to be able to make those purchases.
As we mentioned, David Feeney's citizenship has led to the by-election in Batman, and we've seen Bill Shorten take a harder stance on Adani. Is that the start of him leaning left on a number of policy issues?
No, I think it reflects, I think it's fair to say if you look at the course of the last 6 to 12 months, general public views about whether or not this mine should go ahead. I think there's increasing scepticism in the minds of the Australian public about it. They've certainly said strongly that they don't think taxpayer dollars should go in to support the development of the mine or in particular the infrastructure that supports it. There have been questions raised in the last week about whether or not the economics stacks up. And so people are entitled to say, well, is this really a project that should be going ahead? I think we're certainly got our fingers on the pulse on this issue much better than the Conservatives do, and you saw what a role it played in the Queensland election.
But do you feel as though this is specific to the Batman by-election, given you're up against the Greens, and that's going to be that's going to be their point of difference in certainly as far as Adani is concerned?
Can I say this in all due respect on a Sunday morning? I completely disagree with that. And the reason, Andrew, is because I think if you look, as I said, the course of the last 12 months, there has been a growing concern about whether or not this project is going to be able to stand up on its own two legs, if it's going to stack up economically and environmentally. And I think that's played itself out at state and federal, and certainly playing itself out on the federal level, but certainly at state level, at the Queensland level, it's been playing itself out. So, we are certainly, very conscious of what the public mood is on this and reflecting a lot of that.
I mean, the polls would seem to indicate, the early polling, that it'll be a close run thing between Labor and the Greens in the Batman by-election. If you were to lose, are there implications, certainly for Bill Shorten and his leadership?
I think we have a fantastic candidate in Jed Carney. She will definitely, fly that Labor flag very strongly in that by-election. So from our point of view, let's go through the by-election. We're in a very strong position to hold Batman, and we'll be working on that. But again, you take nothing for granted. Individual voters will make their mind up on that, and we'll see how we end up.
Internally, is the Batman by-election compounding factional issues within the Labor Party?
No, I mean, I've been a member of the party since my late teens, and these things, they seem to flare up from time to time and ease back, but we always find a way through it. I still remember, national conferences where people were worried about how much back in the 80s, factionalism would tear the Labor Party apart, and it never did. And then they complained when we were getting our act together that it was meaning that there was no life in the Labor Party. And then when it crops up again, people are worried about it. I think, we just manage it in our stride.
And as mentioned, this by-election triggered by the fact that David Feeney's been forced to resign over citizenship concerns. Again, this morning we're seeing the papers. Perhaps we've got Felinski in McKellar from the Liberals. That he too is likely to be referred to the High Court as far as his ties or his parentage from Polish descent, bringing into question his eligibility to sit in Parliament. We've also got Susan Lamb from Labor in Queensland. How much further are we likely to go? Have you readily identified the number of members on your side who are likely to end up in the High Court?
Well, I think it was reflected in the opening to this segment, to the start of our chat, about how politics this year is pretty much going to start the way it ended on this issue. And it shouldn't be that way. Frankly, we wanted the Parliament to make a decision on all those people on both sides of politics and on the crossbench, where there was a question mark, to be referred, and the government refused to do it. We thought that would be the best way to be able to clear this matter up, and the government steadfastly said no, and so now we have this issue helping start the year or frame the year in this way, and it shouldn't. It's a mess, and the government shouldn't have done it this way. And so in Jason Falinski's case, you've seen fresh questions being raised about whether or not he is being totally upfront and not being slippery about the way in which he's dealing with issues surrounding his citizenship. And it shouldn't have been the case. This should have been dealt with last year, but again, the government plays the game in a way that makes people scratch their heads as to how they can make.
But
these
you make
decisions.
the argument also for Susan Lamb, for instance, on your side.
And that's why we're saying, Andrew, that all these, in terms of be it Liberal, Labor, or crossbench, we put up names last year that should have gone forward and had this matter sorted out. It was not a partisan move on our part. It was anyone that we thought had legitimate questions hanging over them that this should be referred on and dealt with, so that the public can have confidence that their representatives, their political representatives, are sitting there properly in the House of Representatives or the Senate.
Just briefly before we go, we had the big cabinet files leak this week. It's a bizarre story,
Totally.
but it's very serious. Are there broader implications for the way that documents are kept safe within the Parliament?
Well, I think firstly that we owe a debt of thanks to Australian media for raising this, even though it's embarrassing and uncomfortable for the Parliament or for the government in particular. It's important that this is highlighted at a time where we're trying to encourage better cyber security management by Australian businesses and consumers. The Australian government, the Turnbull government, has shown it can't even work out how to manage its own filing cabinets and cabinet papers that are sitting there in second-hand office furniture stores somewhere in Canberra. It has made us into a laughing stock, made us into a joke on the world stage where others are reporting that we've got cabinet documents being treated this way. And the other thing is too, I think there's a serious national security implication in this, and that is, we have a lot of information that's shared behind closed doors for national security reasons. They end up in some of these documents and then they're not managed properly, and the question will be whether or not our partners on the world stage will be so willing to share crucial information that's important to us and them, because they're worried about whether or not we can actually manage our own filing cabinets.
Ed Husick, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
A group of